Earth lost contact with its fleet. Then a strange human ship returned. The year was 2187, and humanity had grown used to the stars. It had been almost 100 years since the first faster-than-light drive was built in a lab outside Geneva. Since then, humans had spread out slowly but surely, planting small colonies on moons and rocky worlds within 50 light-years of home. Earth was no longer alone in the galaxy, or so people believed. In truth, humanity had barely scratched the surface of what was out there. The United Earth Space Command, known simply as USC, ran the largest fleet humanity had ever built. It was called the Vanguard Fleet, and it was made up of 12 ships, each one a marvel of human engineering. The flagship, the U.S. Horizon, was 3 kilometers long, carrying 6,000 crew members, and armed with weapons that could level a small moon if needed. The fleet's mission was simple on paper: travel beyond the edge of explored space, make contact with any intelligent life they found, and report back everything they learned. Admiral Elena Cross stood on the bridge of the Horizon, watching the stars stretch into thin lines as the ship prepared for its final jump before entering unexplored territory. She was 52 years old, with short gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen 20 years of service. She had commanded ships before, but nothing like this. This was the mission of a lifetime, the one that would decide whether humanity was truly ready to call itself a spacefaring species. "Admiral, we are ready for the jump," said Commander Marcus Webb, her second in command. He was younger than her, only 35, but he had a calm confidence that made him good at his job. "Do it," Cross said. The ship shuddered gently as the drive engaged, and space folded around them. In a heartbeat, they were somewhere new, somewhere no human had ever been. The view screen filled with a strange star field, dimmer than the one they had left behind, with a faint purple haze in the distance that scientists later guessed was a nebula, rich in unusual elements. For the next few weeks, the fleet explored. They found 3 uninhabited planets that could one day support life, a strange asteroid belt that seemed to have been mined long ago by someone or something, and traces of old radio signals that were too faint to decode. Every day, the fleet sent a report back to Earth through a chain of relay drones, each one jumping the message a little closer to home. It took nearly 2 weeks for a message to arrive, but Earth always got its updates, and everyone back home followed the mission closely. Children in schools drew pictures of the horizon. News networks ran daily specials called Fleet Watch, where experts discussed what the ships might find next. Then, on the 41st day of the mission, the messages stopped. At first, nobody at U.S. headquarters in Houston panicked. Signal delays happened. Sometimes a relay drone drifted off course, or a solar storm scrambled the transmission. But when a full week passed with nothing, people started to worry. When 2 weeks passed, worry turned into fear. General Marcus Reyes, the man in charge of US's deep space operations, called an emergency meeting with the highest levels of Earth's government. "We have never lost contact with the Vanguard fleet for this long," Reyes said, standing before a room full of serious faces. "Not once in the entire mission. Something happened. Could it be a technical failure?" Asked one of the council members, a woman named Sarah Chen who represented the science division. 12 ships, all with different systems. It seems unlikely they would all fail at once. "That's what worries me," Reyes said. "If it was one ship, I would say bad luck. But all 12, including the relay drones? That doesn't sound like an accident." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. Humanity had always hoped that when it finally met intelligent life among the stars, that meeting would be peaceful. But nobody could be sure, and now, for the first time, Earth had to consider the possibility that its finest fleet, carrying 72,000 souls, had met something out there that did not want to be friendly. Earth sent a rescue mission 6 months later, once new ships could be built and prepared. It was smaller than the Vanguard fleet, only 3 vessels, but it was Earth's best effort under the circumstances. The rescue fleet traveled to the last known coordinates of the horizon and its sister ships. What they found was nothing. No wreckage, no debris field, no distress beacons. The space where the fleet had last reported in was simply empty, as if the ships had never been there at all. The rescue fleet searched for 3 months. They found faint traces of ship exhaust that could have belonged to human engines, but the trail went cold near a dense asteroid field that their sensors could not fully penetrate. Eventually, Low on supplies and unable to find any further clues, the rescue fleet turned back and returned to Earth with nothing but questions. The loss of the Vanguard fleet became the greatest tragedy in human spaceflight history. 72,000 people, gone without a trace. Memorials were built in cities all over the world. Every year on the anniversary of the last transmission, people gathered to remember those who were lost. Slowly, painfully, humanity began to move on, though it never truly forgot. The stars, once seen as a place of hope and adventure, now carried a shadow of fear. Earth became more cautious. New colonies were still built, but expansion slowed. The government invested heavily in defense technology, building bigger ships with stronger weapons, just in case whatever had taken the Vanguard fleet ever came looking for more. 7 years passed. By the year 2194, most people had accepted that the fleet was gone forever, its fate a mystery that would never be solved. The children who had once drawn pictures of the horizon were now teenagers, more interested in their own lives than a mission that had failed before some of them could even remember it clearly. The news networks had long since stopped running Fleet Watch specials. Life on Earth had returned to something like normal, though the shadow remained, quiet and distant, like an old wound that still ached sometimes. Then, on a cold morning in March, something changed everything again. A deep space listening station on the far edge of the solar system, near the orbit of Neptune, picked up an unusual signal. It was faint, barely more than a whisper against the background noise of space, but it was unmistakably a human distress code, one that had not been used in years because it belonged to ships from the old Vanguard fleet design. The technician on duty that night was a young woman named Priya Patel, only 23 years old and new to the job. She almost dismissed the signal as an error, a strange echo of old data bouncing around in space. But something told her to double-check it, and when she did, her hands began to shake. The signal was real. It was coming from an object approaching the solar system at incredible speed, faster than any known human ship could travel, and it was broadcasting an identification code that matched the U.S. Meridian, one of the 12 ships lost with the Vanguard fleet 7 years earlier. Priya called her supervisor immediately, and within an hour, the news had traveled all the way up to General Reyes, who was woken from his sleep to hear it. He did not believe it at first. Nobody did. Ships did not simply reappear after 7 years of silence, especially not ships that everyone had assumed were destroyed. But the tracking data was clear, and it kept updating every few minutes, showing the object growing closer. By morning, 3 of Earth's newest defense ships had been scrambled to intercept the approaching vessel, just in case it was some kind of trick or trap. Admiral Reyes himself boarded one of them, the U.S. Sentinel, determined to see with his own eyes what was happening. As the Sentinel and its escorts moved into position near the edge of the solar system, sensors began to paint a picture of the approaching ship, and what they saw left everyone speechless. It was the Meridian. There was no doubt about the shape, the size, the general design. It was clearly built by human hands, using human technology that Earth's engineers would recognize. But it was also wrong, somehow. The hull was covered in strange patterns that had not been part of the original design. Dark lines like scars running across the metal. Sections of the ship had clearly been rebuilt or repaired using materials that did not match anything in Earth's catalogs. New weapon systems jutted out from parts of the hull where none had existed before, systems that looked far more advanced than anything humanity currently possessed. And strangest of all, the ship's engines glowed with a soft blue light that pulsed steadily, unlike any human drive system in existence. "Sentinel, this is Reyes. Do we have any response to our hailing signals?" the Admiral asked, his voice tense as he watched the strange ship grow larger on the view screen. "Negative, sir," replied the communications officer. "We're sending on all frequencies, but there's no response yet. Wait, sir, we're picking up something now." The bridge went quiet as a signal came through, distorted at first, then clearing into a voice. It was human, unmistakably human, though the words that followed made everyone's blood run cold. "This is Captain Elias Voss of the Meridian, requesting permission to dock at Earth," the voice said, calm and steady, though there was something strange in the tone, something that did not sound quite like an ordinary human anymore. "We have much to report. Earth needs to know what happened to the fleet. Earth needs to know what is coming." Admiral Reyes exchanged a look with his crew. Nobody on the bridge had ever heard of Captain Elias Voss. The Meridian's captain, according to the old records, had been a woman named Captain Alicia Torres. If this ship really was the Meridian, and this really was one of its crew speaking, then something had happened out there in the dark. Something that had changed not just the ship, but the people aboard it as well. "Permission granted," Reyes said finally, his voice steady despite the storm of questions racing through his mind. "Follow our escort in. We will meet you at the edge of Earth's defense perimeter. Stand by for boarding protocol." There was a pause on the other end of the channel, long enough that Reyes wondered if the connection had been lost. Then the voice returned, quieter this time, almost gentle. "Understood, Admiral. But I must warn you now, before we arrive, what you find aboard this ship will not be what you expect. We are still human. We are still your people. But we are not the same as we were when we left Earth 7 years ago, and the story we carry with us is one that will change everything humanity believes about its place among the stars." The channel went silent. On the bridge of the Sentinel, nobody spoke for a long moment. Admiral Reyes stared at the approaching ship, its strange blue engines glowing steadily against the black of space, and felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold of the void outside. 7 years of silence were about to end. And whatever answers were coming, Reyes had a feeling that Earth would never be the same again. As the two ships closed the distance between them, escorted carefully toward the edge of Earth's defense perimeter, word of the discovery spread through the highest levels of government. Within hours, the President of the United Earth Council was briefed. Within a day, the news had leaked to the public, and the entire world watched with a mixture of hope and dread as the strange, scarred ship that had once been the Meridian made its slow approach toward home. Nobody knew what had happened to the Vanguard fleet during those 7 lost years. Nobody knew what had changed the crew of the Meridian, or why only 1 ship had returned when 12 had been lost. But everyone, from the highest general to the youngest child watching the news, understood that the answers were finally coming. And judging by the strange new weapons bolted onto the hull of a ship that once carried nothing but scientific instruments, those answers were not going to be simple, and they were not going to be comfortable. Somewhere out in the dark, humanity had found something. And now, after 7 long years, it was finally coming home to tell the tale. The Meridian docked at Titan Station, the largest orbital platform in Earth's defense network, 3 days after it was first detected. Admiral Reyes insisted on overseeing the boarding personally, along with a team of Marines, doctors, and scientists. Nobody knew what to expect. Some feared a trap, others feared disease. A few, quietly, feared that the ship was not carrying humans at all, but something wearing human voices as a disguise. When the airlock finally opened, the tension on the platform was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marines stood ready, with weapons raised, though not aimed directly at the opening. Doctors waited with scanning equipment. Reyes stood at the front, his hand resting on the sidearm at his hip, though he hoped he would not need it. The first person to step through the airlock was a man in his late 30s, tall and lean, wearing a uniform that had clearly once belonged to the U.S., but had been altered. Extra armor plating had been added to the shoulders and chest, stitched together from materials nobody recognized. His hair was longer than regulation allowed, and there was a long scar running from his left eyebrow down to his jaw. But his eyes were the most striking thing about him. They were calm, steady, and old, in a way that did not match his face. This was a man who had seen things, and those things had changed him. "Captain Elias Voss," the man said, giving a small nod. "Thank you for letting us come home." "Admiral Marcus Reyes," Reyes replied, studying him carefully. "Where is Captain Torres? The records show she commanded the Meridian." Voss's expression tightened for just a moment before he answered. "Captain Torres died 4 years ago. I was her second in command. I took over after she was lost." He paused, glancing back toward the ship. "There is a lot to explain, Admiral. More than I can cover standing here in this airlock. May we come aboard the station? My crew needs medical attention, and I need to speak with your government as soon as possible." Reyes studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "How many crew do you have?" 312, Voss said quietly, "out of the original 6,000 who served aboard the Meridian." The number hit the room like a physical blow. 312 survivors out of 6,000, and that was just one ship. If the other 11 vessels of the Vanguard fleet had suffered anything close to those losses, the death toll would be staggering. far worse than anyone on Earth had imagined during the years of uncertain mourning. "Bring your people aboard," Reyes said finally. "We'll get them medical care. And then, Captain, I want the full story." Over the following hours, the surviving crew of the Meridian were brought onto Titan Station. Doctors moved among them, running scans and treating injuries both old and new. What they found left even the most experienced medical staff shaken. Many of the survivors had scars, some old, some strange in shape, unlike any wound doctors had seen before. A few had cybernetic implants that were not of human design, technology grafted onto their bodies, using methods Earth scientists could not immediately explain. Some had unusual markings on their skin, tattoos or brands that none of the doctors could identify. But more than the physical differences, it was the way the crew acted that unsettled the medical staff. They were disciplined in a way that went beyond military training. They moved together, watched each other's backs constantly, and reacted to sudden noises or movements with a speed and alertness that seemed almost inhuman. When a supply crate was accidentally dropped nearby, 3 crew members were on their feet with weapons drawn. Before anyone could explain, it was nothing. They apologized afterward, looking almost embarrassed, but the reaction had been instant and precise, like a reflex built through years of constant danger. Captain Voss was taken to a secure briefing room, where Admiral Reyes, several government officials, and Sarah Chen from the Science Division waited to hear his story. Voss sat down slowly, as if his body carried old aches that never fully healed, and began to speak. "We left Earth 7 years ago, on the Vanguard mission," Voss began. "You already know that part. What you don't know is what happened on day 42, the day after our last transmission home." He paused, gathering his thoughts, and the room waited in silence. "We were exploring a system near the edge of the Purple Nebula, the one your telescopes had already mapped from a distance. It looked ordinary at first. A yellow star, a handful of planets, nothing special. Then our sensors picked up something in orbit around the 4th planet. A structure, artificial, massive, bigger than anything humanity had ever built. Admiral Cross ordered the fleet to approach carefully, hailing on all frequencies, following protocol exactly as we were trained. We wanted first contact to go well. We wanted to prove that humanity could be trusted among the stars." Voss's jaw tightened, and for a moment, the calm mask slipped, revealing something darker underneath. "They didn't answer our hails. Instead, they attacked without warning. Their weapons were unlike anything we had ever seen, some kind of energy beam that could cut through our hull plating like it was paper. 4 of our ships were destroyed within the first 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Admiral. 10 minutes, and we lost thousands of people before we even understood what was happening." Sarah Chen leaned forward. "Did you identify the species responsible?" "Later, yes," Voss said. "We call them the Caldrath now. At the time, we knew nothing about them, except that they were fast, well-armed, and utterly ruthless. Admiral Cross tried to organize a retreat, but our FTL drives had been damaged in the opening attack. We couldn't jump away. We were trapped in their system, surrounded, outgunned. She made the decision to fight, to buy time for as many escape pods and shuttles as possible, to get away and hide among the outer planets and asteroid fields, hoping some of our people could survive and eventually find a way home." He stopped, staring down at his hands for a long moment. The horizon fought until the very end. Admiral Cross went down with her ship. 6 other vessels were destroyed in that first battle. The remaining 5, including the Meridian, managed to break away, badly damaged, and scattered in different directions, trying to escape the Caldrath patrol ships that hunted us through that system for days afterward. 5 ships survived the initial attack, Reyes said slowly, but only 1 has returned. What happened to the others? Voss's eyes darkened. The Caldrath found and destroyed 2 more within the first month, ships that couldn't repair their drives in time. Another was captured almost fully intact, crew and all. Though what happened to those people after that, I can only guess, and I do not like my guesses. That leaves the Meridian and the US Falcon, which I believe is still out there somewhere, though we lost contact with them nearly 3 years ago, during a battle in a system we called the Boneyard, for reasons I'll explain later. The room was silent, absorbing the weight of what Voss had described. An unprovoked attack, no attempt at communication, thousands dead within minutes. It was the nightmare scenario that every leader on Earth had quietly feared, but never truly believed would come true. How did you survive for 7 years? Sarah Chen asked. How did your ship become this? The weapons, the armor, the engine modifications, none of that is standard human design. Voss allowed himself a small, tired smile, the first hint of something other than grim seriousness since he had entered the room. That, Dr. Chen, is the more interesting part of the story. Because surviving the Kaldrath meant we had to learn quickly, adapt faster than anyone thought possible. And along the way, we discovered something the Kaldrath and every other species we encountered out there never expected. And what was that? Reyes asked. That humans do not know when to quit, Voss said simply. Every other species we met out there, the ones caught in the same web of danger we were, they had rules, limits, lines they would not cross, even to survive. We didn't have those limits, not because we're cruel, but because we had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Our people, our crew. Whatever was left of our chance to get home and warn Earth. That kind of desperation, Admiral, it changes a person. It changed all of us. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something like pride entered his voice. The first year was the worst. We ran, we hid, we lost good people to injuries we couldn't properly treat, and to Kaldrath patrols that never stopped hunting for us. But somewhere in that first year, we found allies. Not human allies, Admiral. Other species, ones who had also suffered under the Kaldrath, or under other predatory empires that ruled that part of space. Species who had given up hope of ever fighting back. What species? Chen asked, leaning forward with obvious scientific curiosity despite the grim subject matter. There will be time for details later, Voss said. But the short version is this. We found a species called the Threll, small, intelligent, technologically advanced but physically weak, who had been enslaved by the Kaldrath for generations. We found the Orvane, a warrior culture who had fought the Kaldrath for decades but always lost, because they fought with honor, against an enemy who had none. And we found ruins, Admiral. Ancient ruins belonging to a civilization far older and more advanced than anything currently active in that region. A civilization that had vanished long before any of us arrived, but left behind technology, weapons, and knowledge that changed everything. Reyes exchanged a glance with the other officials in the room. You're saying you found alien technology and used it to modify your ship. I'm saying we found alien technology, alien allies, and alien enemies, and we learned to survive among all three, Voss said. The Meridian you see today isn't just a human ship anymore. It carries the weapons of a dead civilization, the medical knowledge of the Threll, and the battle tactics of the Orvane, all combined with human ingenuity and human stubbornness. We didn't just survive out there, Admiral. We built something. And what we built is going to matter a great deal, because the Kaldrath are not staying where they are. They are expanding, and Earth is well within the range of where they will eventually come looking for new territory to conquer. The room fell into a heavy silence. Admiral Reyes stared at Captain Voss, a man who had left Earth 7 years ago as a junior officer and returned as something else entirely, forged by fire into a leader who spoke of alien empires and ancient ruins as easily as he once might have discussed a routine patrol schedule. How long do we have? Reyes finally asked. Before the Kaldrath become a threat to Earth? Voss considered the question carefully before answering. Based on their expansion rate over the 7 years we observed them, and assuming they eventually locate Earth's coordinates, which they will, given enough time, and enough captured records from ships they've destroyed, I would estimate we have somewhere between 10 and 20 years before they arrive in force. Less, if they prioritize this direction. More, if they remain focused on conquering the species closer to their own territory. 10 to 20 years, Sarah Chen repeated softly. That's not very long to prepare for a war. No, Voss agreed. It isn't. Which is why I came home, Admiral. Not just to report what happened to the Vanguard fleet, though Earth deserves to know that truth, and to properly honor the dead. I came home because Earth needs to prepare, and prepare quickly. I came home because out there, in the dark corners of the galaxy that Earth has never seen, there are enemies who will not offer mercy, and there are allies who might help us survive, if we are wise enough to reach out to them in time. He paused, looking around the room at the shocked faces of Earth's leadership. and something steady and resolute settled into his expression. I also came home because the crew of the Meridian, all 312 of us, we made a promise to each other out there, during the darkest days, when it seemed certain none of us would ever see Earth again. We promised that if even one of us made it home, we would make sure Earth never faced what we faced. Unprepared, unwarned, alone in the dark against an enemy who does not know the meaning of mercy. Admiral Reyes was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had just heard. The scope of it was staggering. An alien empire capable of destroying human ships within minutes. Thousands of lives lost in a single ambush. A crew that had spent 7 years fighting for survival among the stars, forging alliances and enemies that Earth knew nothing about. And now, a warning that humanity's homeworld itself might one day fall under the same shadow that had claimed the Vanguard fleet. "Captain Voss," Reyes said finally, his voice steady despite the weight pressing down on him. "I think you and your crew need to speak with the full Earth Council, immediately, and I think Earth needs to hear every detail of what happened out there, no matter how difficult it is to accept." Voss nodded slowly. "I expected as much, Admiral, and there is one more thing you should know before that meeting happens." "What's that?" "The Meridian is not the only reason I came home in a ship built from human bones and alien technology," Voss said, his eyes hardening with something that looked almost like determination mixed with grief. "I came home because somewhere out there, the USS Falcon is still fighting, still hiding, still trying to survive with whatever crew remains aboard her, and I made a promise to her captain, an old friend of mine, that if I made it back to Earth first, I would convince your government to send help. Real help. Because the war we started fighting 7 years ago, whether Earth realizes it yet or not, is not over. It has only just reached its next chapter." The briefing room fell silent once more, the weight of Voss's words settling over everyone present. Outside, beyond the reinforced windows of Titan Station, the stars shone as they always had, distant and quiet, giving no hint of the dangers that lurked among them. But for the people in that room, the stars would never look the same again. The full Earth Council meeting happened 2 days later, in the largest chamber of the United Earth Government building in Geneva. Captain Voss stood before hundreds of representatives from every nation on Earth, along with the president of the council, military leaders, and scientists from around the world. Cameras broadcast the meeting live, and for the first time in years, every person on the planet stopped what they were doing to listen. Voss told his story again, this time in greater detail, filling in the gaps he had left out during the smaller briefing on Titan Station. He spoke of the ambush, the deaths, the desperate scattering of the surviving ships. He spoke of the first months of running, when the Meridian's crew had lived on rationed food and constant fear, never knowing when the next Caldrath patrol would find them. He spoke of losing people, good people, to injuries, to starvation, to the crushing despair of believing they would never see home again. Then he spoke of the turning point. "It happened in the 8th month," Voss said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's speakers. "We had been running along the edge of a debris field, an old battle site where the Caldrath had apparently fought and destroyed another species long before we arrived. Our sensors detected life signs among the wreckage, weak, fading, but present. Against the advice of some of my crew, Admiral Cross's former executive officer, Commander Sato, who had taken temporary command after we lost several senior officers in the initial attack, decided we would investigate. We couldn't leave anyone to die out there if we could help it, even if they weren't human." He described how they had found the Threll, a small alien species with large dark eyes and slender bodies, hiding in the wreckage of a destroyed transport ship. They were refugees, survivors of a Caldrath raid on their homeworld, barely alive after weeks adrift with failing life support. "We took them aboard," Voss continued. "Our medical staff worked for days to stabilize them. It wasn't easy. Their biology was different from ours, in 100 small ways, and we had no reference for how to treat them. But we managed, because giving up was never something this crew learned how to do." The Threll, it turned out, were far more than simple refugees. Among them was an engineer named Keel, who had worked on advanced technology before the Caldrath destroyed his world. Grateful for being saved, and horrified to learn that humans had also fallen victim to Caldrath aggression, Keel offered to help the Meridian's crew in any way he could. "Keel taught us things about Caldrath technology that changed how we fought," Voss said, He showed our engineers how to modify our sensor arrays to detect Caldrath cloaking signatures, which gave us crucial early warning before their patrols could ambush us again. He helped us understand the weaknesses in their shield technology, weaknesses that our own scientists eventually learned to exploit. Without Keel, I do not believe the Meridian would have survived its first year out there. Over the following months, Voss explained, the Meridian had rescued more survivors, both human, from escape pods that had drifted for weeks in the cold dark of space, and non-human, refugees from a dozen different species that the Caldrath Empire had conquered or destroyed over the decades. The crew of the Meridian grew, in a strange way, becoming a floating refuge for anyone desperate enough to trust a battered, ambush-scarred human warship. It was during the second year that we met the Orvan, Voss said. They found us, actually, rather than the other way around. A squadron of their fighters intercepted us near a system they claimed as contested territory. We expected another fight. Instead, once they realized we were fellow victims of the Caldrath, and once they saw how we fought when their scouting patrol accidentally led a Caldrath hunting party to our position, they offered an alliance. The Orvain, Voss explained, were a proud warrior species, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin like hardened leather, and a strict code of honor that governed nearly every aspect of their lives. They had been fighting the Caldrath for over 30 years, losing ground steadily despite their courage, because their rigid tactics made them predictable, and the Caldrath had learned to exploit every weakness in their strategies. The Orvan commander, a warrior named Threk Voss, no relation, despite the shared name, that was simply how his people pronounced certain sounds, was impressed by how differently humans fought, Voss continued, and a small, proud smile crossed his face for the first time during the briefing. We didn't follow a strict code of honor in battle, not because we lack honor, but because survival mattered more to us than following predictable patterns. We used tricks, deception. We struck where the enemy least expected, retreated when retreating made sense, and struck again when the moment was right. Threk called it undisciplined at first. Later, after fighting alongside us for a year, he called it the only style of warfare that had ever actually worked against the Caldrath. The alliance with the Orvan proved crucial. Their warriors provided combat experience and knowledge of Caldrath tactics that the Meridian's crew desperately needed, while human ingenuity provided the Orvain with new strategies that finally allowed them to win battles they had been losing for decades. Together, human and Orvain forces began to strike back against Caldrath patrols, rescuing captured slaves, destroying supply convoys, and slowly building a resistance network among the many species suffering under Caldrath rule. It wasn't easy, Voss said, his expression growing somber again. We lost people every single engagement. Good people, human and alien alike. I watched friends die more times than I can count during those years. But every victory, no matter how small, gave hope to species who had forgotten what hope felt like. And that hope spread. More species joined our cause. More resources became available. By the fourth year, what had started as one damaged human ship trying to survive had grown into something larger. A resistance movement, spread across a dozen systems, made up of a dozen different species, united by a shared enemy and a shared belief that no one deserved to live under Caldrath oppression. A representative from the science division raised her hand, and the council president allowed the question. Captain Voss, you mentioned ancient ruins earlier, and technology from a civilization that no longer exists. Can you tell us more about that? Voss nodded slowly. During the fifth year, our resistance network discovered something unexpected. Deep within a system, the Caldrath avoided entirely, for reasons we didn't understand at first. We found the remains of an ancient civilization, one that had apparently been wiped out thousands of years before any of the current species in that region had even developed space travel. We called them the Architects, since we never learned their true name. Their ruins contained technology far beyond anything the Caldrath possessed. Weapons, shielding systems, even fragments of what appeared to be faster-than-light communication devices. And the Caldrath avoided this system, the representative asked. Why? We believe, Voss said carefully, that the Caldrath feared whatever destroyed the Architects in the first place. We never found conclusive evidence of what that was, but the ruins showed signs of a battle so devastating that it had scarred the very planet itself, melting stone and metal alike. Whatever ended the architect's civilization was powerful enough to leave the Kaldrath, an empire that had conquered dozens of species without mercy, too afraid to even investigate the wreckage. A murmur ran through the council chamber. The idea that something existed powerful enough to frighten the very enemy that had nearly destroyed humanity's finest fleet was a sobering thought. Our engineers, working alongside the Threll and using knowledge shared by the Orvane, spent nearly 2 years studying and adapting what we found in the architect ruins, Voss continued. The weapons and armor you see on the Meridian today are the result of that work. We didn't just copy their technology. We didn't fully understand most of it, honestly. But we adapted what we could, combined it with our own engineering, and built something new. Something that gave us a fighting chance against an enemy that had once seemed unbeatable. The council president, a stern woman named Amara Ose, leaned forward at the podium. Captain Voss, you've described an incredible 7 years of survival, alliance building, and technological discovery. But I think everyone in this chamber, and everyone watching at home, wants to know the same thing. Why now? Why did you choose this moment to return to Earth, after 7 years of silence? Voss took a breath before answering, and when he spoke, his voice carried a new weight, heavier than before. Because 3 months ago, our resistance network intercepted Kaldrath communications discussing expansion plans, he said. Plans that included star charts extending in this direction, toward human space. They don't know exactly where Earth is yet. Our scattered fleet never transmitted our origin coordinates during the ambush, and thankfully, none of our captured ships or crew members survived long enough, or were foolish enough, to reveal that information under interrogation. But the Kaldrath are thorough, and they are patient. Given enough time, enough captured records, enough careful investigation, they will find Earth eventually. He paused, looking around the chamber at the shocked faces staring back at him. When my crew and I intercepted that information, we held a vote. We could have stayed, continued fighting alongside our allies, continued chipping away at the Kaldrath Empire from within. It was tempting, honestly, because we had built something meaningful out there, relationships and a cause worth fighting for. But in the end, we agreed that Earth needed to know what was coming. Earth needed time to prepare, to build alliances of its own, to develop the kind of technology and tactics that could stand against an enemy like the Kaldrath. So we repaired the Meridian as best we could, said difficult goodbyes to friends we had fought alongside for years, and made the journey home. And the Falcon? Ose asked. You mentioned another surviving ship. The Falcon remains out there, continuing the fight alongside our allies, Voss said. Her captain, Elena Vasquez, agreed that someone needed to stay behind and maintain the resistance network we had built, to keep pressure on the Kaldrath and continue protecting the species who had joined our cause. We could not simply abandon them after everything we had built together. But she also agreed that Earth needed a warning, and that the Meridian, being in slightly better condition after recent repairs, was the ship best suited to make the journey home. The chamber was silent for a long moment, the weight of everything Voss had shared settling over the assembled representatives of humanity. Finally, President Ose spoke again, her voice measured and careful. Captain Voss, on behalf of the entire Earth Council, I want to thank you and your crew for your sacrifice, your resilience, and your courage in bringing this warning home. We have much to discuss and much to prepare for, but first, I believe Earth owes a great debt to those who did not survive this journey, and to those who continue fighting even now, far from home. What can we do, immediately, to help the Falcon and your allies out there? Voss's expression shifted, something like relief and determination mixing together on his scarred face. Send help, Madam President. Real help, not just ships and weapons, though those matter too. Send people willing to learn, willing to build alliances with species who have never had reason to trust anyone outside their own kind before. The Kaldrath are strong, but they rule through fear and cruelty, not loyalty. Every species I have encountered out there wants the same thing humanity wants: freedom, safety, and a chance to build a future without living in constant terror of annihilation. If Earth can offer that, if Earth can prove itself a true ally, rather than just another power seeking to protect its own borders, then I believe we can build something strong enough to stand against the Kaldrath, and against whatever other dangers exist out there in the dark. President Ose nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the responsibility now resting on humanity's shoulders. Then we will begin preparations immediately. Captain Voss, I would like you and your surviving crew to work closely with our military and scientific leadership in the coming weeks. Your knowledge of Kaldrath tactics, architect technology, and the political situation among the species you've encountered will be invaluable as we plan our response. It would be my honor, Madam President, Voss said, bowing his head slightly. Though I must warn you, the road ahead will not be easy. We are asking humanity to prepare for a war that most people didn't even know was coming, against an enemy more powerful than anything Earth has ever faced. But I have seen what humans can accomplish when pushed to their limits. I have watched ordinary people, engineers and doctors and soldiers who never expected to fight an interstellar war, rise to become some of the finest warriors and leaders I have ever known. If anyone can meet this challenge, it is us. As the meeting drew to a close, and the Council began the difficult work of planning humanity's response to the looming Kaldrath threat, Captain Voss stepped away from the podium, exhausted but resolute. 7 years of survival, of loss, of hard-won victories among the stars, had brought him to this moment. Earth finally knew the truth about what had happened to the Vanguard fleet, and more importantly, Earth finally understood what was coming. The war that had started with an ambush 7 years ago, far beyond the edge of known space, was no longer just the concern of a scattered, struggling group of survivors and their alien allies. It was now humanity's war too, whether Earth was ready for it or not. And somewhere out among the stars, the crew of the U.S. Falcon continued fighting, holding the line, waiting for the day when Earth would finally answer the call and join the struggle for freedom that Captain Voss and the survivors of the Meridian had given 7 years of their lives to build. In the months following Captain Voss's return, Earth changed faster than it ever had before. The Council declared a state of global emergency, not the kind that caused panic in the streets, but the kind that united nations behind a single, urgent purpose. For the first time in human history, every country on the planet pooled its resources toward one shared goal, preparing for a war that was still years away, but was now certain to come. Shipyards that had once built slow cargo vessels and small colony transports were retooled to construct warships. Captain Voss and the surviving crew of the Meridian worked around the clock alongside Earth's top engineers, sharing everything they had learned about Kaldrath weaknesses, architect technology, and the tactics that had allowed a handful of scattered human survivors to fight back against an empire that had once seemed unstoppable. Keel, the Threll engineer who had joined the Meridian's crew years earlier, became something of a celebrity among Earth's scientific community. His knowledge of Kaldrath shield frequencies and sensor technology proved invaluable, and he took great pride in teaching human engineers everything he knew, grateful for the chance to help the species that had once saved his life. He was joined by 2 other Threll survivors, and, surprisingly, by Threk Voss himself, the Orvane warrior, who had fought alongside Captain Voss for years, and insisted on traveling to Earth to help train humanity's soldiers directly. Threk arrived 6 months after the Meridian's initial return, aboard a small Orvan scout ship that had been quietly built and dispatched once word reached the Resistance network that Earth was finally ready to join the fight. His arrival caused a sensation. He was the first confirmed alien to ever set foot on Earth, and cameras from every news network on the planet captured the moment he stepped off his ship at Titan Station, standing nearly 7 feet tall, his leathery gray skin marked with ceremonial scars that told the story of decades spent fighting the Kaldrath. Captain Voss speaks the truth about your people, Threk said during his first public address, his voice deep and rough, translated through a device strapped to his chest that Keel had helped design. I have fought beside humans for years. I have seen them bleed, and I have seen them refuse to fall, even when bleeding. Your species has a strength that many others lack, a refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seems certain. This strength will serve you well in the war to come, but only if you learn quickly, and only if you learn from those of us who have already paid a heavy price fighting this enemy. Threk spent the following 2 years training Earth's military forces, teaching tactics that had been refined through decades of hard-won experience against the Kaldrath. He taught human soldiers how to recognize Kaldrath battle formations, how to exploit weaknesses in their ground troop equipment, and how to coordinate large-scale defensive strategies against an enemy that relied on overwhelming force and speed. His training was harsh, sometimes brutally so, but the soldiers who trained under him respected him deeply, understanding that his methods came not from cruelty, but from a desperate desire to make sure humanity, would not suffer the same losses the Orvane had suffered over their 30 years of war. Meanwhile, far from Earth, the war continued. Captain Elena Vasquez and the crew of the U.S. Falcon kept fighting alongside the resistance network that Voss had helped build, striking Caldrath supply lines, rescuing enslaved species, and slowly expanding the web of alliances that stretched across a dozen star systems. Every few months, encrypted messages arrived at Earth through a relay system the Threll had helped design, updating the Council on the Resistance's progress and requesting supplies, reinforcements, or specific technology that Earth's growing industrial capacity could now provide. 3 years after Voss's return, Earth launched its first true interstellar warship, built with combined human and alien technology. It was named the U.S. Alicia Torres, in honor of the Meridian's original captain, who had given her life during the initial ambush 7 years before Voss's return. The Torres was smaller than the old Horizon had been, but far more advanced, equipped with adapted architect shielding, weapons designed with Threll engineering principles, and a hull reinforced using techniques the Orvane had perfected over decades of brutal warfare. Captain Voss, promoted to admiral in recognition of his years of survival and leadership, was given command of Earth's first true combat fleet, a force of 12 ships built specifically to reinforce the resistance network and, eventually, to face the Caldrath in open battle if it became necessary. The fleet was named the Second Vanguard, in honor of the original mission that had started this entire chapter of human history, and in memory of the 72,000 souls who had been lost 7 years before it all began. The journey back to the Resistance Network took nearly 2 months, traveling through carefully mapped routes that avoided known Caldrath patrol areas. Admiral Voss stood on the bridge of the Torres as the fleet approached the coordinates where the Falcon and the Resistance forces were last known to be operating, his heart pounding with anticipation and worry in equal measure. He had not seen Elena Vasquez in 3 years, not since their difficult goodbye when he had left to carry Earth's warning home. He did not know what he would find, whether the Resistance had grown stronger, or whether the Caldrath had finally crushed it in his absence. What he found exceeded even his most hopeful expectations. The Resistance Network had grown into something far larger than the small alliance he had left behind. Dozens of ships from a dozen different species now operated together, coordinated through a command structure that Vasquez and the other leaders had carefully built over the years. Entire star systems that had once lived under Caldrath rule had been liberated, their populations now free to rebuild their lives and contribute to the growing coalition, fighting against their former oppressors. The Falcon itself had been extensively modified, much like the Meridian before it, bristling with adapted weapons and armor that made it one of the most formidable ships in the Resistance fleet. Captain Vasquez met Admiral Voss aboard the Falcon, and their reunion was quiet but deeply emotional. 2 old friends who had each carried the weight of survival and leadership through years of separation and uncertainty. She had aged visibly during the years apart, new scars and streaks of gray hair marking the passage of time and the toll of constant warfare, but her eyes still held the same fierce determination that had first earned her command of the Falcon so many years ago. "You came back," she said simply, gripping his hand tightly. "And you brought a fleet." "I promised I would," Voss replied. "Earth is ready to fight now, Elena. Not just ready, prepared, trained, armed with everything we learned out here, combined with everything Earth has built in the years since I returned. This war is about to change." Over the following months, the combined forces of Earth's Second Vanguard Fleet and the Resistance Network launched a coordinated campaign against key Caldrath strongholds throughout the region. The battles were fierce and costly, but for the first time since the war had begun, the coalition of species fighting against Caldrath oppression held every advantage. Earth's advanced technology, combined with the Resistance's years of hard-won tactical knowledge and the sheer number of allied species now willing to fight, proved to be more than the Caldrath had ever anticipated facing. The turning point came during the Battle of Korath Station, a massive Caldrath military installation that served as the primary staging ground for their operations in the region. The battle raged for 3 days, involving over 200 ships from both sides, the largest engagement the Resistance had ever attempted. Admiral Voss commanded the human fleet personally, coordinating closely with Orvane battle leaders and Threll technical specialists to exploit every weakness the years of study had revealed in Caldrath defenses. It was a brutal fight. Losses were heavy on both sides, and there were moments during the battle when victory seemed impossible, when the sheer numbers and firepower of the Kaldrath fleet threatened to overwhelm the coalition forces despite their superior tactics and technology. But the combined coalition held firm, refusing to break even, as ships burned and crews fought desperately to keep their vessels operational under withering enemy fire. On the third day, with Kaldrath reinforcements finally exhausted and their station's defenses critically weakened, Admiral Voss led a final coordinated assault that broke through the last line of Kaldrath resistance. Korath Station fell, its command structure destroyed, its remaining forces either destroyed or forced to surrender. It was the single greatest victory the resistance had ever achieved, and word of it spread quickly throughout the region, inspiring hope among species who had lived under Kaldrath fear for generations. The victory at Korath Station marked a turning point in the war, though it did not end the conflict entirely. The Kaldrath Empire was vast, and countless battles still lay ahead before their power could be truly broken. But for the first time, the coalition forces understood that victory was not just possible, but achievable, if they continued to fight together with the same unity and determination that had carried them through years of desperate struggle. Back on Earth, news of the victory arrived through the relay system, and celebrations erupted across the planet. For years, humanity had lived under the shadow of the Vanguard fleet's mysterious disappearance, followed by the frightening revelation of an alien threat capable of destroying humanity's finest ships within minutes. Now, finally, there was real hope, proof that humanity, alongside its newfound allies, could stand against that threat and win. President Osei addressed the Earth Council and the watching world following the news of the victory, her voice filled with a mixture of pride and solemn remembrance. 7 years ago, we lost 72,000 souls to an enemy we didn't even know existed. 3 years ago, we learned the truth of what happened to them, and we learned that a far greater danger loomed on our horizon. Today, we celebrate a victory won not by Earth alone, but by an alliance of species who refuse to accept oppression, who refuse to give up hope, even in the darkest of circumstances. This victory belongs to every soul lost aboard the Vanguard fleet, to every survivor who fought to bring their story home, and to every ally, human and otherwise, who has stood together against a common enemy. The war is not over. But today, we take one more step toward a future where no species need live in fear of Kaldrath cruelty ever again. Admiral Voss, standing on the bridge of the Torres, amid the wreckage of the battle they had just won, allowed himself a rare moment of quiet reflection. He thought of Admiral Cross, who had given her life defending the horizon during that first terrible ambush 7 years ago. He thought of the hundreds of crew members who had died during those first desperate months of survival, and the thousands more who had fallen during years of resistance warfare. He thought of Keel, who had risked everything to help a crew of strangers from a distant world. He thought of Threk, who had taught humanity to fight smarter, and who now stood beside him as a trusted friend rather than a wary ally. And he thought of Earth, the homeworld he had once feared he would never see again, now standing united behind a cause greater than any single nation or species. The journey from that first terrible ambush to this hard-won victory had been long, filled with loss and sacrifice that could never be fully repaid. But standing on the bridge of a ship built from the combined knowledge of a dozen different worlds, watching the wreckage of a defeated Kaldrath stronghold drift silently through space, Admiral Voss finally allowed himself to believe that the promise he and his crew had made so many years ago, that Earth would never face an unknown enemy unprepared and alone, had finally been fulfilled. The war against the Kaldrath Empire would continue for years to come, filled with more battles, more losses, and more hard-won victories. But the foundation had been laid, built on the courage of survivors who refused to give up, the wisdom of allies who chose trust over fear, and the unbreakable determination of a species that had learned, through unimaginable hardship, that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, hope could still find a way to survive. 5 years after the victory at Korath Station, the war against the Kaldrath Empire had transformed into something few could have imagined during those dark early days, when Captain Voss first returned to Earth aboard the battered Meridian. What had begun as a desperate fight for survival had grown into a true interstellar alliance, one that now included over 20 species, spanning dozens of star systems, all united under a coalition banner that humans and their allies simply called the Free Stars Alliance. Earth had changed as much as the war itself. The planet that had once been cautious, even fearful, about its place among the stars, had become the beating heart of a growing interstellar community. Titan Station, once a simple defense platform, had expanded into a massive hub where humans, Threll, Orvane, and representatives of a dozen other species worked side by side, sharing knowledge, culture, and the hard-won camaraderie that only comes from fighting a shared enemy together. Admiral Elias Voss, now in his mid-40s, had become one of the most respected military leaders in the entire alliance, human and alien alike. His hair had grayed further, and new scars had joined the old ones from years of continued fighting, but his steady leadership had guided the coalition through some of its most difficult battles. He no longer commanded from the front lines as often, having taken on broader responsibilities coordinating strategy across the many fronts where Alliance forces continued to push back against the shrinking Kaldrath Empire. But he still visited the battlefields regularly, unwilling to ask soldiers to fight and die in places he was not willing to go himself. Keel, the Threll engineer whose knowledge had proven so crucial in those early years, now led an entire division of Alliance research and development, working alongside human, Orvane, and other species scientists to continue improving the technology that had turned the tide of the war. He had become something of a legend among his own people, credited with helping liberate dozens of Threll worlds that had lived under Kaldrath rule for generations. He often told visiting Threll children the story of how a wounded human ship had found him drifting in the wreckage of a destroyed transport, and how that single act of kindness had eventually led to the liberation of his entire species. Threk Voss, the Orvane warrior who had trained Earth's first generations of soldiers, had risen to become a general within the Alliance's combined military command, one of the few non-human officers granted such authority over mixed human and alien forces. He remained close friends with Admiral Voss, and the two often joked that their shared name, despite being nothing more than an odd coincidence of translation, had become something of a symbol for the unlikely brotherhood between their two species. Captain Elena Vasquez, who had held the resistance together during those crucial years while Voss carried Earth's warning home, now commanded the Alliance's largest combined fleet, a force of over 300 ships representing every member species of the coalition. She and Voss remained close, their friendship forged through years of shared hardship, and though the demands of command kept them apart more often than either would have liked, their partnership had become one of the cornerstones of the Alliance's continued military success. The Kaldrath Empire, once seemingly unstoppable, had been pushed back significantly over the years of continued warfare. Their core territories remained heavily defended, and the fighting there continued to be brutal and costly, but the Empire's outer conquests had been steadily liberated, one system at a time, by the combined forces of the Free Stars Alliance. Species that had lived for generations under Kaldrath rule now governed themselves once more, many of them choosing to join the Alliance as full members, contributing their own unique knowledge, resources, and warriors to the ongoing struggle. It was during this period of steady progress that the Alliance made a discovery that would once again change the course of the war, and perhaps the course of history itself. During a routine survey mission near the edge of Kaldrath territory, an Alliance scout ship crewed by a mixed human and Orvane team discovered signs of another ancient architect ruin, far larger than any previously found. Unlike the smaller ruins that had provided the technology used to modify the Meridian and the Falcon years earlier, this site appeared to be an intact facility, remarkably preserved despite the thousands of years that had passed since the mysterious architect civilization had vanished. Admiral Voss led the expedition to investigate the site personally, accompanied by Keel, several Threll and Orvane specialists, and a team of human scientists eager to unlock whatever secrets the ancient facility might hold. What they found exceeded anyone's expectations. The facility appeared to be some kind of central archive, containing vast amounts of preserved data about the architect's civilization, their technology, and crucially, information about what had ultimately destroyed them. The data was difficult to translate, requiring months of careful work by the combined efforts of Alliance scientists from multiple species. But slowly, piece by piece, the story of the architects began to emerge. They had been, according to the records, an ancient and powerful civilization that had once dominated a significant portion of the galaxy, far more advanced than even the current Kaldrath Empire. But their downfall had come not from an external enemy, but from within, a catastrophic conflict born from their own internal divisions and pride. a war that had ultimately destroyed their civilization and left behind only scattered ruins and abandoned technology for others to discover. The lesson embedded within the Architect archives was clear, and Admiral Voss made sure it was shared throughout the entire alliance. Power alone, no matter how great, was never enough to guarantee survival. It was unity, cooperation, and the willingness to stand together, despite differences, that had allowed the Free Stars Alliance to accomplish what it had, and it would be that same unity that would determine whether the Alliance could ultimately succeed where the Architects had failed. The discovery of the Architect Archive also provided crucial new technology and knowledge that further strengthened the Alliance's capabilities, technology that would prove instrumental in the campaign still ahead. But more than the technology itself, Admiral Voss often said in the years that followed, it was the lesson of the Architect's downfall that mattered most, a reminder to every species within the Alliance that their strength came not from any single world or any single people, but from their shared commitment to standing together against tyranny and oppression. 10 years after Captain Voss first returned to Earth, aboard the scarred and battle-worn Meridian, the Free Stars Alliance had grown into the most powerful coalition of species the region of space had ever known. The Kaldrath Empire, though still dangerous and still fighting fiercely to defend its remaining core territories, was no longer the unstoppable threat it had once seemed. The war was far from over, and difficult battles still lay ahead, but for the first time, since that terrible ambush had claimed the Vanguard fleet, there was genuine hope that lasting peace and freedom might one day be achieved. Earth itself had transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience throughout the Alliance, a homeworld that had suffered a devastating tragedy and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate because of it. Young humans grew up hearing stories of the Vanguard fleet, not as a tale of loss and mystery as previous generations had known it, but as the beginning of humanity's greatest chapter, the moment when Earth stepped fully into its place among the stars and chose to stand for something greater than itself. A memorial had been built on Titan Station, honoring not just the 72,000 souls lost aboard the original Vanguard fleet, but every soul, human and alien alike, who had given their lives in the long struggle against Kaldrath oppression. Representatives from every Alliance species visited the memorial regularly, a quiet reminder of the cost of freedom and the importance of never forgetting those who had sacrificed everything to achieve it. Admiral Voss visited the memorial often, particularly on the anniversary of that first terrible battle that had claimed Admiral Cross and so many others aboard the Horizon. He would stand quietly before the long list of names, remembering old friends and honoring the memory of a mission that had begun with hope, ended in tragedy, and ultimately given birth to something far greater than anyone involved could have ever imagined. On one such visit, 10 years to the day after the Meridian's fateful return to Earth, Voss was joined by Keel, Threk, and Elena Vasquez, each of them taking a moment from their busy duties to stand together before the memorial, much as they had stood together through so many battles over the years. "Do you ever wonder," Vasquez asked quietly, staring at the long list of names, "what would have happened if we had simply given up, back in those first months, if we hadn't found Keel or made contact with Threk's people?" Voss considered the question for a long moment before answering. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted, "but I don't think we ever really had the choice to give up. Not really. Humans don't seem built that way, not when there's something worth fighting for. And once we found allies who shared that same stubborn refusal to accept defeat, giving up stopped being an option for any of us." Threk placed a large hand on Voss's shoulder, a gesture of deep respect among the Orvane. The Architects had power beyond imagination, and still they fell, because they forgot the value of standing together. Your people never forgot that lesson, even in your darkest hour. That is why the Alliance endures, and why it will continue to endure, long after the Kaldrath threat has finally been ended. Keel nodded in agreement, his large dark eyes reflecting the soft light of the memorial. "My people would not exist today, not as a free species, if your crew had chosen to fly past our wreckage that day, rather than stopping to help strangers, who had nothing to offer in return except gratitude. I have often wondered what made your people choose differently than others might have. I believe now that it is simply who humans are. You see suffering, and you cannot simply look away, even when logic might suggest that helping strangers puts your own survival at greater risk." Voss smiled slightly, thinking of Admiral Cross, of the crew of the original Horizon, and of every human, Threll, Orvane, and countless other Alliance members, who had given everything they had to build the coalition that now stood as humanity's greatest achievement among the stars. Maybe that's the real lesson in all of this, he said finally, looking out through the observation window at the stars stretching endlessly beyond Titan Station. Stars that had once represented mystery and fear, but now represented the vast, hopeful future of a united alliance of free species. Not that humans are stronger, or smarter, or better than any other species out there. Just that when we see someone in trouble, we can't help but try to help, no matter the cost. And it turns out, that simple stubborn kindness, multiplied across a dozen species who all believe in the same thing, is stronger than any weapon the Kaldrath ever built. The four of them stood together in comfortable silence for a while longer, honoring the memory of those who had been lost, and quietly celebrating the incredible journey that had carried them from that first terrible ambush to this moment of hard-won hope. Outside, the stars continued their endless dance, indifferent to the struggles and triumphs of the countless species living among them. But for the growing Free Stars Alliance, and for humanity's place within it, those same stars no longer represented an unknown and terrifying frontier. They represented home. 10 years after Earth lost contact with its greatest fleet, and a strange, scarred human ship returned carrying warnings of danger and seeds of hope in equal measure, humanity had found its true place among the stars, not as a conqueror, not as a victim, but as a steadfast ally to every species willing to stand together against tyranny. And though the war against the Kaldrath Empire would continue for years still to come, filled with battles yet unfought and sacrifices yet unmade, the Free Stars Alliance stood united, unbreakable, and ready to face whatever challenges the vast, mysterious galaxy still had waiting for them in the endless dark beyond the stars. The story of the Vanguard fleet, once a tragedy shrouded in mystery and grief, had become something far greater, the beginning of humanity's finest chapter among the stars, proof that even in humanity's darkest hour, hope, courage, and stubborn compassion could light the way toward a future brighter than anyone had dared to imagine.